Hello. So today we will move into the video lesson for week 8. So in this video lesson, I will quickly take you through some of the things we have discussed in video lesson 7 about cost of capital, and then we'll move into capital structure. So cost of capital is the cost of capitals employed by an organization. It is also called as the required rate of return of an organization. The average cost of funds, which is the average return required by the firm's investors, and this is the amount the company has to pay in order to obtain funds. So in order to evaluate investments, we use something called weighted average cost of capital. So it is a weighted average of the cost of capitals. In other words, in order to calculate the weighted average cost of capital, for each capital, we are using the values as well as the cost. So by using the values and cost of each capital, we calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So there are different types of cost of capitals. For each type of capital, there is a cost. In other words, for debt, the cost of capital is referred to as cost of debt. For cost of debt, normally we are taking after-tax cost of debt. Similarly, we have a cost of capital for preference shares, cost of preference shares, a cost of capital for existing ordinary shares, RS, a cost of capital for new ordinary shares, RE. So these are some of the definitions or terms that we are using to define different cost of capitals. So what I have explained earlier, weighted average cost of capital. Capital structure is the combination of different capitals in the company's total capital. So usually we are using weighted average cost of capital after tax. In other words, all the cost of capitals we have to take after the tax saving benefit. This is especially applicable for debt capital because on debt capital, we are paying interest. So on the interest, we are saving tax. So when it comes to debt capital, we need to calculate after tax cost of debt. So since we are using after tax cost of debt for debt capital, our weighted average cost of capital is also after tax. So how do we calculate the after tax cost of debt? After tax cost of debt, we calculate as before tax cost of debt, that is RE. From that, we remove the tax saving benefit. Therefore, to calculate the after tax cost of debt, we take before tax cost of debt that we multiply by 1 minus tax rate. So that is what is explained here. So cost of preference shares or required rate of preference shares is the return required by preference shareholders that we calculate by dividing preference share dividends by net price of preference share, which is the difference between current price and the flotation cost. Retained earnings are existing ordinary shares. So to calculate the cost of retained earnings, we can use one of the two formulas. One formula is the capital asset pricing model, where we say required rate of return equals to risk-free rate of return and the risk premium. Or else we can calculate the required rate of return of equity by taking dividend yield. Dividend yield is next year's dividend D1 over the current price and the capital gain. So whichever the way, either by taking risk-free rate of return and the risk premium, or by taking dividend yield and the capital gain, we can calculate the cost of retained earnings. Normally to calculate cost of retained earnings, there are three formulas. One is the CAPM formula, capital asset pricing model, discounted cash flow model, or we can approximately calculate cost of retained earnings by taking bond yield and to that by adding a premium. So capital asset pricing model is the formula that we had discussed in video lesson 7. Risk-free rate of return, and to that we add in a risk premium. So how we add the risk premium? We take the individual securities beta factor. To the individual securities beta factor, we multiply the risk premium of the market. So how we calculate the risk premium of the market? Market return minus risk-free rate of return is the market risk premium that we multiply by individual securities beta factor in order to get the risk premium of the security. So risk premium of the security we add to the risk-free rate of return in order to calculate the cost of retained earnings. That is based on CAPM model. So based on discounted cash flow model, how we calculate retained earnings is by taking dividend yield, that is next year's dividend divided by current price, and to that by adding the capital gains, that is G. So other than those two, we can calculate cost of retained profits or cost of retained earnings by also taking an approximate figure. In other words, to the bond yield or to the cost of debt, we can add a risk premium, which is a ballpark figure, in order to calculate the cost of retained earnings. This is just a ballpark figure or an approximate figure where we add a risk premium, an estimated risk premium on top of the cost of bonds. So as you can see here, cost of retained earnings is equal to bond yield or cost of the bonds plus risk premium. We are adding a ballpark or an approximate risk premium to the bond yield. So if the bond yield is 10%, if the risk premium is assumed to be 4%, then the cost of retained profits is going to be 14%. So now let's move into cost of new equity. So when you are issuing new ordinary shares, how we calculate the cost of those shares? So cost of new equity would be next year's dividend or D1, like in the case of cost of existing ordinary shares. Even in the case of new ordinary shares, we take next year's dividend D1, that we divide by P0, which is the current price, minus flotation cost. And to that we add in the capital gain rate, or the rate represented by growth rate, G. So this is how we calculate the cost of new ordinary shares. So I repeat that cost of new ordinary shares is equal to dividend yield. Dividend yield is next year's dividend divided by net price. In other words, D1 divided by P0, net of flotation cost, and to that we add in the capital gain rate, which is represented by growth rate. So target capital structure, a company's target capital structure should be its optimal capital structure. In other words, a company should target to have a capital structure that minimizes weighted average cost of capital. Thereby, the company can increase the value of the company. Therefore, the optimal capital structure in a company is the capital structure that minimizes the weighted average cost of capital. So you can read here, it is the percentage of debt, preferred stock, and common equity that will maximize the firm's share price. In other words, optimal capital structure is the capital structure that will minimize the firm's weighted average cost of capital, thereby increasing the value of the company. So weighted average cost of capital, it is the weighted average of the component cost of debt, preferred stock, and common equity. So as I told you, weighted average cost of capital is the average cost of capital which are weighted against the values. In other words, to calculate the weighted average cost of capital, we use both the cost of each capital and the weightages of each capital. In other words, the amount invested in each capital and the cost of each capital are combined in order to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So you can see here the formula for weighted average cost of capital. Proportion of debt, that is percentage out of our total capital, percentage of debt into after tax cost of debt. To that we add in percentage of preference shares, which means out of our total capital, how much we have invested in preference shares into cost of preference shares, plus proportion of common equity. Out of our total capital, percentage invested in equity into cost of equity. So basically, for each capital, we consider the percentage invested out of total capital in that capital and the cost of that capital. So marginal cost of capital is something different to weighted average cost of capital. As the word says, marginal cost of capital means the additional cost of capital or the increase in the weighted average cost of capital due to increase in capital. In other words, if due to new capital introduction, weighted average cost of capital changes, then we have to calculate the marginal cost of capital. Always the word marginal means additional. So therefore, as a result of introducing new capital, if the weighted average cost of capital increases, in that point, we have to calculate marginal cost of capital. The cost of obtaining another dollar of new capital. the weighted average cost of the last dollar of the new capital raise. So basically, as I told you, if you are raising new capital, if the weighted average cost of capital changes, at that point, we have to calculate the marginal cost of capital by taking the differences. So let's see all these calculations we'll see when we are working out the questions. So marginal cost of capital schedule, based on our calculation of marginal cost of capital, we can schedule which I'm going to show in the next slide. So if you look at this new slide, you can see as long as the total capital is $100 million, as long as the total capital is $100 million, the company's weighted average cost of capital is 10.5%. When the capital increases more than 100 million, when the capital increases more than 100 million, weighted average cost of capital increases to 11%. So from 101 million to 150 million, the new weighted average cost of capital is 11%. Thereafter, when the company raises additional capital beyond $150 million, weighted average cost of capital further increases. So this is the marginal cost of capital schedule. As I told you, if due to new capital, weighted average cost of capital changes, then at that point we have to calculate the marginal cost of capital. So break point, it is the dollar value of new capital that can be raised before an increase in the firm's weighted average cost of capital occurs. Okay. So after this, we can move into investment opportunity schedule. In other words, this is a schedule which compares the rate of return of new investments as against the cost of capital. So we can move into the chart in order to understand how this schedule differs with the marginal cost schedule. So if you carefully look at this graph, you will see that there are various investment opportunities and also there are various cost of capitals. Now those green lines, there are several green lines separated by dotted marks. Those green lines indicate various investment opportunities a company is having. So a company is having a project which gives a 12% return, 11.6% return, 11.5% return, 11.3% return, and 10.8% return. The point here is when the company comes to undertake the last investment, which is giving the lowest return, that is 10.8%, the company has to raise $140 million, for which the company's WACC at that point would be 11%. So I repeat, this company is having 5 projects called A, B, C, D, and E. All 5 are, let's say, viable projects. So project C is given 12%, the highest return. Next, B is given 11.6%, D is given 11.5%, E is given 11.3%, and project A is giving the lowest return, 10.8%. It is more than the original WACC of 10.5%, but unfortunately, when the company has to undertake A, it requires $140 million. By the time they raise $140 million, the company's WACC increases to 11%. Therefore, this company should not undertake project A. That is the meaning of this chart. So investors' required rate of return, as we know, is weighted average cost of capital, which we can calculate as the weighted average of individual cost of capital. So there are different cost of capitals we have discussed earlier. We have after-tax cost of debt, cost of preference shares, cost of existing ordinary shares, and cost of new ordinary shares. So there are different cost of capitals. Using these cost of capitals, we can calculate the weighted average cost of capital, which is the cost of capital after taking the percentages of investment in each capital. So this is the difference between the weighted average cost of capital and the individual required rates of returns. So this slide again tells a different cost of capitals with regard to debt or bonds. It is after tax cost of debt. With regard to preference shares, it is cost of preference shares. Then with regard to ordinary shares, earlier we have looked at how to calculate the cost of ordinary shares. If it is for a existing ordinary share, then we take dividend yield D1 divided by P0. To that we add in the growth rate or capital gain. If it is new ordinary shares, we take dividend yield as D1 divided by net price. Net price is issue price minus the flotation cost, and to that dividend yield we add in the capital gain rate, which is the growth rate. So with that we conclude that presentation, but we will do some questions now in order to understand what we had discussed. So we'll start with some questions on risk and return, which we had discussed in the previous video lesson. So question number 1, you are looking at two investment opportunities. A and S, invest in international shares and give you the following returns. So there are three possible situations. There's a 50% chance of earning a return of 12%, 20% chance of earning a return of 20%, and there's a 30% chance of earning a return of minus 4%. Then the other company, TNC, invest in blue chip shares and give you the following return distribution. There's a 60% chance of earning a return of 8%, 20% chance of earning a return of 13%, and 20% chance of earning a return of 2%. So the question is, which one will you choose to invest in? Fully explain how you arrived at your conclusion. So we'll work out this question. I will do that in my Microsoft Excel. So I can say on risk and return, question 1. There are three situations. And for each situation, we have a probability. %, 20%, 30%. And in the other company, these are the probabilities in A and S. These are the probabilities in A and S. So for the other company, which is TNC, probabilities are 60%, 20%, 20%. Then I can put the returns for R figures for A and S. And then I can put R figures or individual return figures for T and C. R figures for A and S, 12%, 20%, minus 4%. For T and C, %, 13%, and 2%. The question is about which investment they should choose. So basically we have to calculate the coefficient of variation. For that, I need to calculate both expected return and the standard deviation of the two investments. So it's a complete question. So first I can calculate the expected return, R bar. So I can say R bar of A and S. I can calculate it here. In A and S, probability for the first situation 50% into the return plus for the probability for the second situation into the return plus the probability for the third situation into the return. So expected return of A and S 8.8%. Now I can calculate the expected return of T and C. That will be T and C probability for the first situation into expected return, probability for the second situation into expected return, and probability for the third situation into expected return. So the expected return of T and C is 7.8%. So these are the expected returns of A and S and T and C. Now I can calculate the standard deviations. Standard deviation, as you know, is the square root of variance. What I can do is, I will first calculate the standard deviation of A and S. So I need to put the situation probability for A and S. So I'll repeat these two information. Then I know the individual returns of A and S. And also here I have calculated the expected return of A and S. Expected return of A and S is 8.8%. Now I can calculate. For simplicity, I will name these columns. I'll say this is A, B, C, and D. So here, what I'm going to take is individual return minus the expected return. In other words, C minus D. C minus D. So if you take the individual return minus the expected return, this minus this. So I can continue that. So individual return minus the expected return for the first situation, 3.2%. For the second situation, 11.2%. For the third situation, minus 12.8%. Then what I do is, I square these answers. In other words, I can show it here like this, C minus D, answers in that column, I can square. In other words, I multiply this by that, same figure. When I take the square of this column, in other words, what I did in this column is I have taken, or I have multiplied the values in this column by the same value. In other words, I have taken the square. So 3.2% I have multiplied by 3.2%, 11.2% I have multiplied by 11.2%, minus 12.8% I have multiplied by minus 12.8%. So when you take the square of a minus figure, it becomes a positive figure. Thereafter, what I do is, for the answers that I have obtained in that column, that is, these answers, I multiply by the probability. Multiply by the probability. Probabilities for A and S are in the second column. So what I do is, I multiply these figures by the probabilities. And thereafter I can take the total. This total is the variance. It is not the standard deviation, it is the variance. This is the variance. Standard deviation would be the square root of variance. Standard deviation is the square root of variance. So to calculate the standard deviation, we take the square root of this answer. So standard deviation of A and S is 8.9%, or approximately 9%. I can calculate the coefficient of variation of A and S also, CV. So CV, as we know, standard deviation divided by the expected return, 8.8. So coefficient of variation is 1.01 times in A and S. 101% means 1.01 times. So coefficient of variation is 1.01 times. That is the coefficient of variation of the first company, A and S. Now we have to do the same for the other. So let's now calculate the standard deviation of the other company, T and C. So I'm going to copy the workings of the previous company, A and S, because I can substitute the figures to calculate the standard deviation and the coefficient of variation for T and C. So here I need to take the probabilities of T and C. This is a different company that I can take from previous data. Probabilities of T and C, 60%, 20%, and 20%. Individual returns of T and C, 8%, 13%, and 2%. Then the expected return of T and C, earlier we have calculated, expected return of T and C is 7.8%. For A and S, 8.8%, for T and C, 7.8%. Then I can take the difference between the individual return and the expected return, that is the difference between column C and column D. So since the formula is there, the computer has automatically calculated that. In other words, this 0.2% is the difference between 8% and 7.8%. This 5.2% is the difference between 13% and 7.8%. As you can see, this minus 5.8% is the difference between 2% and 7.8%. Thereafter, these answers I have multiplied again by the same answer, or in other words, I have taken the square value. So that has also automatically come from the calculator or from the computer. So this is 0.2% into 0.2%. This is 5.2% into 5.2%. This is minus 5.8% into minus 5.8%. So the minus figure has become a positive figure. Thereafter, those answers I multiply by the probabilities. So those answers have also come from the computer. So no need to change. So I have the variance in T and C. Variance is 12.16%. And based on this, standard deviation is the square root of variance, 3.49%. 3.49% in T and C. So based on the standard deviation and the expected return of T and C, I can calculate the coefficient of variation, that is standard deviation divided by expected return. So it is 0.44 times. Coefficient of variation in T and C is 0.44 times. We express that normally in number of times. So the coefficient of variation of first company, which is A and S, coefficient of variation of A and S is 1.01 times. Coefficient of variation of T and C is 0.44 times. So out of the two investments, if the objective of the investor is to averse the risk, then he will select the investment which minimizes the risk for a percentage of investment, for a percentage of return, that is company T and C. So the answer would be company T and C. We can check the answer. You can see the coefficient of variation of A and S. The answer says 1.0125. Coefficient of variation of T and C 0.4474. Therefore, a rational investor will choose to invest in the company where there is a lower risk compared to a percentage of return, that is company T and C. So the answer is T and C, as we had discussed. So now we'll move into question number 2. So question number 1 is about an individual investment. In the individual investment, risk return calculation and the coefficient of variation calculation. Question 2 is about a portfolio. So you own a portfolio which comprises 2 assets. So in this portfolio, you have 2 assets, 1000 shares of company X valued at $5 with an expected return of 8%, 1500 shares of company Y valued at $2 with an expected return of 12%. Calculate the expected return of the portfolio. So you have to calculate the expected return of the portfolio. Give your answer as a percentage per annum to 2 decimal places. Okay, so let's see how to do this question now. So question 2. X and Y. The 2 companies are X and Y. And this person has invested in 1000 shares of X at $5. So I can say investment in X is $5,000, and he has invested in 1500 shares of Y valued at $2. So investment in Y is $3,000. So total investment is $8,000. Now we can calculate the percentage of investment in each company. Percentage of investment. So percentage of investment in X, 5,000 divided by total value of investment. In Y, 3,000 divided by the total value of the investment. So the percentage of investment in X is 62.5%. In Y, 37.5%. So now we are given the expected return of X and Y. Now we can put those. Expected return of X is 8% per annum, and the expected return of Y is 12% per annum. So based on these expected returns and the percentages of investments, we can calculate the expected return of the portfolio. Expected return of the portfolio. P means the portfolio, that is return of X is 8% into the percentage of investment in X plus return of Y is 12% into the percentage of investment in Y. So the portfolio return is 9.5%. This is the answer to question number 2. portfolio expected return is 9.5%. You can see answer 9.5%. So now we can move into question number 3. You are preparing for an expensive world tour. It has to be a world tour. You are preparing for an expensive world tour with your band. You have invested a lot of money into it and you want to know whether or not it is likely to be profitable. Your financial advisors advise you that there is a 40% chance that your album will hit #1 on the charts and ticket sales will increase, in which case you can expect a return of 30% on your funds invested in the tour. So you are told that there's a 40% likelihood that album will be a success, and if that happens, the person will get a return of 34%. There's a 30% probability that the album won't hit #1 but will still be in the top 10, in which case you can expect a return of 20% on the investment. So in the medium case or in the medium scenario, there's a probability of 30% and the expected return of 20%. There is also a 30% chance that your album won't hit the charts at all, where the album will be unsuccessful, in which case you will have to cancel the tour and suffer a loss of 30%. So negative return of 30% on the funds you invested in the tour. You are trying to decide whether or not you should go ahead with the tour. What is your expected return and the standard deviation? Should you go ahead if the required rate of return is 10%? So let's try to do this question now. Question number 3. So as per this question, there are 3 situations. Success, normal, and a failure. So probabilities are probability of being successful 40%, normal 30%, and failing 30%. If the tour becomes successful, return would be 34%. If it is medium success, return will be 20%. If it is unsuccessful, return would be minus 30%. I can calculate the expected return now. That is individual return into the probability. The expected return is 10.6%. So now I can move into the calculation of standard deviation. So I can put R bar. R bar is 10.6%. So R minus R bar. That is third column minus the fourth column. These are the figures. 23.4%, 9.4%, and minus 40.6%. Then I can take the square of these figures. In other words, R minus R bar of those figures, I can take the square. In other words, multiplying by the same figure. So as you can see, this is 23.4 into 23.4. This is 9.4 into 9.4. This is minus 40.6 into minus 40.6. So that becomes a positive figure. Then I multiply those answers by the probabilities. These answers I multiply by the respective probabilities. in order to get the variance. So the total of this column will be the variance. This is the variance. Standard deviation is the square root of variance. (27.20%). So coefficient of variation is standard deviation divided by the expected return or the risk for 1 unit of return 2.56 times. This normally we express in number of times. 2.56 times. So since there is no choice here, coefficient of variation is not that relevant, but anyway, since we have calculated the standard deviation and the expected return, let's calculate coefficient of variation, although it is not that relevant in this particular instance, since there is no choice, since there is no other investment for the figure. So basically, based on the given information, the expected return is 10.6%, standard deviation is 27.2%, coefficient of variation 2.56 times, although it is not very relevant here. So to answer the question, I'll go back to the question. So first, the answer for the expected return, you can check here 10.6%, standard deviation 27.2%. We got the answers. So there's another part in the question. Should you go ahead if your required rate of return is 10%? So if your required rate of return is 10%, should you go ahead with the investment? Answer should be yes. Why the answer is yes? Because your required return is 10%, but you can expect to get 10.6%. So your expected return is more than the required return. Therefore, theoretically, you should go ahead with the tour. So we can say, theoretically, I will put it like that. Theoretically, the tour should go on. Theoretically, the tour should go on. I can say here, expected return is higher than the required return. Therefore, the tour is viable. Therefore, the tour is viable theoretically. Those are the questions given under risk and return in the tutorial. So now we'll discuss some questions given in the tutorials for cost of capitals. So under weighted average cost of capital, the first question. Shinetzel Industries recent financial statement revealed the following balance sheet and cost of funds information. So you are given these balance sheet values and cost of funds. If the company's tax rate is 30%, what is the after tax weighted average cost of capital? So after tax weighted average cost of capital, this is how we are going to calculate. I'll open another Excel sheet for that. So these questions are about weighted average cost of capital. Weighted average cost of capital. So here it says they have 4 sources of funds: bank loan, bonds, preference shares and ordinary shares. We are given the values and the cost of funds. Source of funds, cost and the value. There are four sources of funds: bank loan, bonds, preference shares, I'll say preference shares, and ordinary shares. Different values: 12 million, 10 million, 15 million, and 28 million. 12, 15, sorry, 12, 10, 15, 12, 10, 15, and 28. 12, 10, 15, and 28. So total would be 65 million. Total would be 65 million. Okay, cost of capitals are given, but we are given the before tax cost of debt. So before tax cost of debt in the bank loan is 8%. Tax rate is 30%. Tax rate 30%, before tax 8%. So carefully follow what I am going to do here. Before tax cost of debt is 8%. That I need to multiply by 1 minus 30%. 1 minus 30%. 30% means the tax rate. In other words, we are saying although the before tax cost of debt is 8%, we are saving 30% from that. Therefore, our net cost is 70% out of 8%. Before tax is 8%, but from that we are saving 30%. So our net cost is 70% out of 8%, which is 5.6%. So the same we can do for bonds. On bonds also, we are given before tax cost of debt. So before tax cost of debt is 8.5%. 8.5%. So 8.5% into, again, 1 minus 30%. That is 5.95%. Almost 6%. Then for preference shares, there is no tax saving. So for preference shares, cost of capital is 21%. And for ordinary shares, cost of capital is 27%. So now I can calculate the WACC. WACC would be each cost multiplied by the individual values. Now here we are not given the proportions, or we are not given the percentages, we are given the values. So this is what we are going to do. We are first going to multiply the cost percentage by the value. Then the total cost we are going to divide by the total value, which is $65 million. So first I am going to multiply individual cost by the individual values. And after taking the total cost in this way, I am going to divide that by the total value of the investment, which is 65 million. So all of this I can put within one bracket. Divide by 65 million. So weighted average cost of capital is going to be 18.4262%, or we can say 18.43%. This is the answer to question number 1. You can check the answer here. Answer for the first question, weighted average cost of capital 18.43%. So now let's move into question number 2. Strudel Private Limited needs to increase its capital base. The Chief Financial Officer has asked you to calculate the weighted average cost of capital for the company, assuming that new funds will be raised in the exact same proportions as currently exist in the company. So they are going to raise new capital exactly in the same proportions, which means, now say for example, if in the previous capital structure equity was 50%, of the new funds also, there will be 50% equity coming in. In other words, the existing capital structure, existing proportions are not going to change. If equity was 50% in the existing capital structure, in the new funds raise also equity will be 50%. So something like that. Your analysis of the company records and the financial markets provide you with the following information. So you are given some information with regard to different types of capitals. Ordinary shares, the company has 40 million shares outstanding. In other words, they have 40 million shares issued. Shares are currently trading at 2.3 per share. The company has traditionally paid dividends of 25 cents but expect dividends to grow at 5% in the foreseeable future. So there is a constant growth rate of 5%. In the event new shares will be issued, there will be an issue cost of 15 cents per share. So when new shares are issued, there will be an issue cost also. Bank overdraft, the company has 3 million rupees in an overdraft facility on which it is charged 12% per annum compounded monthly. So this is an interest rate 12% per annum compounded monthly. So therefore, we have to first calculate the effective annual interest rate. Bonds, the company has 8 million rupees worth of outstanding bonds. The bonds have 10 years to mature. Each bond has 1000 par value, which pays 7% interest annually, and bonds are currently trading at 915 each. Preference shares, the company has 5 million shares outstanding, number of shares. Each has a par value of $10. Shares pay an annual dividend of 6% of par value, and shares are currently trading at 9.35 per share. Sudal Private Limited pay 30% tax. What is the company's after tax weighted average cost of capital? Okay, let's see how to do this question. Question number 2. Ordinary shares in this company, the company has so far issued 40 million ordinary shares, currently trading at 2.3, that is the current market price. They have currently paid or recently paid dividends of 25 cents. Dividend growth rate is 5% per annum. When they issue new shares, we are told there's an issue cost of 15 cents. Okay. So this is how we are going to calculate the cost of ordinary shares. Cost of new ordinary shares. Cost of new ordinary shares, or RE. RE is going to be, RE means cost of new ordinary shares. D1 divided by P0. I'll first write the formula. P0 minus flotation cost So D1 divided by P0 minus flotation cost plus the growth rate. So current dividends D0 is 25 cents. Growth rate is 5%. Share price, current share price is 2.3. P0 2.3. And flotation cost. Flotation cost per share is 15 cents. Based on this, now I can calculate the required rate of return or cost of equity of new ordinary shares. So I have to first calculate D1. So I will calculate D1 here. D1 is going to be D0 into 1 plus the growth rate. So that is going to be D1. So now I can calculate RE. RE is going to be D1 divided by P0, that is 2.3, minus flotation cost. To this we are adding growth rate. The cost of equity is 17.21%. 17.21%. Cost of new ordinary shares. Then on the bank overdraft, interest rate is 12% per annum. Cost of bank overdraft. Cost of bank overdraft. Before tax interest rate is 12% per annum. Tax rate is 30%. So after tax interest rate is 8.4% on the bank overdraft. (8.4%). That is cost of bank OD. Then cost of bonds. The company has 8 million. The company has 8 million rupees worth of bonds, of which par value is, you can see, of which par value is $1,000. Bonds mature after 10 years. Coupon interest rate is 7% annually. And the current price of the bonds is $915. So these are redeemable bonds after 10 years. Cost of redeemable bonds. First, I can calculate the coupon interest. Coupon interest per annum. On the par value of 1,000, coupon interest rate is 7%. So annual coupon interest is $70. So coupon interest per annum is $70, and that continues for 10 years. So I can construct an annuity cash flow here from year 1 to year 10. And then also I can take separately the 10th year cash flow to show the maturity value. And year 0 is the issue price. So I can put the cash flows, issue value. So issue price, this is the price at which bonds are issued. So that is the cash inflow for the issuing company. Bonds are issued at 915. And then coupon interest. Coupon interest is a negative cash flow, 70. And then the maturity payment is $1,000. That is also a negative cash flow for the issuing company. That happens after 10 years. So these are the cash flows, I repeat. For the issuing company, when they issue bonds, first they collect money. So in year 0 or immediately they receive 915 per bond. Then in every year from year 1 to year 10, they need to make coupon interest payments of $70 per year. And then in the final year, the maturity payment or the par value or the face value of the bond has to be paid. That is $1,000, another negative cash flow. So these are the cash flows. So now I can take the total cash flows. Total cash flows. Total cash flows are going to be year 0, 915, year 1 to 10, the annuity cash flow, minus 70, last year minus 1,000. So cost of the bond is the yield to maturity or IRR of the cash flow. IRR of the cash flow. So to calculate the IRR of the cash flow, this is what we do. So to calculate IRR, you can use the cash option. You can use the cash option in the financial calculator. What you have to do is you have to press the cash option. The cash option, Once you enter, you will go to a separate screen where you have to enter cash flows. Cash flows you have to enter in the second row. First row, it says as I percentage. You can ignore that for the time being. And the second row is cash. So when you come to the cash row, and when you come to that row where the calculator has highlighted, you can press EXE in order to enter the cash flows. So if you look at the cash flows in this question, cash flow in year 0 is 915. So when you enter this year 0 cash flow in the financial calculator, year 0 cash flow you have to enter for year 1. Year 0 cash flow you have to enter for year 1, and year 1 cash flow you have to enter for year 2. So in the financial calculator, in the screen which highlights as the first year, you have to enter year 0 cash flow in our investment cash flows. In other words, as per our working, year 0 cash flow is 915. That you have to enter in the financial calculator in the row which highlights as the year 1 cash flow. So for year 1 or in front of year 1, you have to enter 915 as a positive cash flow. And for year 2 to year 11, all will be negative cash flows. So year 2 cash flow that you enter in the financial calculator will be minus 70. Year 3 also it is going to be minus 70. Year 4 minus 70, year 5 minus 70, year 6 minus 70 because there's an annuity cash flow. Year 7 also minus 70, year 8 minus 70, year 9 also minus 70, year 10 also minus 70. And for year 10, since in addition to 70, which is the interest payment, there's an additional 1000 payment occurring in year 10. Total amount that you have to enter in front of 11th year in the financial calculator is 1070. It is negative 1070, not 70 only. Because in the 10th year, as per our original cash flow, in addition to the interest payment, there's a maturity value payment also. So when you combine both, there's a total payment of 1070 in the 10th year that you have to enter in front of 11th year in the financial calculator. So once you enter all these cash flows in the financial calculator, you have to press the escape button, which allows you to come back to the main screen where you have started entering the figures. So when you come to the main screen, then of course you can come down until you find the IRR row or the row which has highlighted IRR. And once you come there, you can press solve button. So when you press the solve button, you get the value of IRR for the cash flow. So the IRR of this cash flow is going to be, as per the calculator, 8.2829%. 8.2829% based on the calculator. So I repeat, when you calculate IRR using the financial calculator, you have to enter all the cash flows under the cash option. So you have to first press cash option in the financial calculator. When you press the cash option, you will go to a screen where the second row allows you to enter the cash flows. First row you can ignore for the time being. The second row is the row where you have to enter the cash flows. So when you come to the second row, you have to press EXE and it will take you to a different screen where you can enter the cash flows. So when you enter in the cash flows in the financial calculator, it starts with year 1. It doesn't have year 0. It starts with year 1. So in the financial calculator, year 1 means in our cash flow, year 0. So in front of 1 in the financial calculator, you have to enter year 0 cash flow in the original cash flow. Since our year 0 cash flow is positive 950, that should be entered as the value in front of 1 in the financial calculator. So in front of 1 in the financial calculator, you enter year 0 cash flow, which is 915. And from year 2 to year 11 in the financial calculator, you have to enter the cash flows from year 1 to year 10 in the normal cash flow, which means our normal cash flows from year 1 to year 10, you have to enter as year 2 to year 11 in the financial calculator. So year 2 cash flow in the financial calculator will be minus 70, year 3 minus 70. Likewise, it will go on till year 10, and in the final year, year 11 or original year 10, you have to enter interest payment of 70 as well as the face value payment of 1000, both combined 1070 as the total cash flow in front of 11th year in the financial calculator, which represents the 10th year cash flow in the original cash flow. So once you enter all the cash flows in the financial, once you enter all the cash flows, all the figures in the financial calculator, when you press the escape button, you come back to the original screen. In the original screen, you have to come down to IRR row. In a particular row, it highlights IRR. When you come to the IRR row, you can press the solve button, and then the calculator will give you the answer for the IRR, which is 8.2829%. So this is the cost of debts or cost of the bonds. So this is the before tax cost of the bonds. We can now convert this into after tax cost of the bonds. So for that purpose, what we have to do is we need to calculate IRR by taking into account tax saving as a cash inflow. So what I'm going to do is, this is the working of the before tax cost of debt. To calculate the after tax cost of debt, I'm going to copy the same cash flows here. So issue price, same issue price. In other words, when the company is issuing in year 0 or immediately they are receiving 915. In year 1 to year 10, coupon interest payment is minus 70. And then the maturity payment in the final year is 1000, same cash flows. Only difference is, in order to calculate the after tax cost of debt, I am including here tax saving. Since the company is paying interest, on those interests, the company can save tax at the rate of 30%. In other words, although the interest payment every year is 70, on this payment of 70, company can save tax at the rate of 30%. So there's a positive cash flow coming due to this 70 at the rate of 30%. That is 21. So now I can calculate the new cash flows, including tax saving. Total cash flows, I can say including tax saving. Total cash flows including tax saving is going to be year 0, 915, year 1 to 10, 49, and final year minus 1000. So year 1 to 10 minus 49, final year minus 1000. So like I have done earlier, I can now calculate IRR for the new cash flows. So in the financial calculator, again, I'm going to use the cash option. In the cash option, once I come to the second row, I press EXE and then start entering the cash flow. So as I told you, year 0 would be year 1 in the financial calculator. So it's a positive cash flow. Then from year 2 to year 10, I will first take those 9 years. From year 2 to year 10, in the financial calculator, we have to enter minus 49. So I'm going to enter it now. So from year 2 to year 10, I'm going to enter minus 49. And in the final year, I'm going to enter minus 1049. Minus 1049, that is minus 49 plus another minus 1000, minus 1049. Once I enter all cash flows, I press escape button. So once I come to the main screen, I go down to IRR row and then press solve. Then I can get the new IRR including tax saving, that is going to be less than the previous IRR. So this is going to be 6.058%. New IRR, including tax saving, is lesser than the previous IRR. So this is cost of bonds, including tax saving. So on preference shares, the company says company has 5 million shares outstanding. Each has a par value of $10. Shares pay an annual dividend of 6% of the par value, and shares are currently trading at 9 rupees and 35 cents per share. Okay, there is no indication whether preference shares are redeemable or irredeemable. So we are going to assume preference shares are irredeemable. So with that assumption, we can work out the cost of preference shares. Cost of preference shares. Let's first put the assumption. Assume that preference shares are irredeemable. Therefore, preference dividends is a perpetuity. So we can say therefore preference dividends is a perpetuity cash flow. Is a perpetuity cash flow. So we'll calculate the preference dividends. Preference dividends per share. So nominal value per share is 10. Dividend percentage is 6% on the par value. So preference dividends per share is 0.6. So we can calculate the cost of preference shares, RP. That will be equal to dividends divided by, there is no growth rate, it's a perpetual cash flow. So dividends divided by P0, current price. So we know dividends is 0.6. Market price of one share is 9.35. 9.35. Therefore, cost of preference shares is 6.42%. That is the cost of preference shares. So now we can go to the weighted average cost of capital calculation, but before that, we need to summarize the data. Source of funds. We had 4 sources of funds: equity, bank overdraft, bonds, and preference shares. Preference shares. So on these sources of funds, we have calculated the cost. We will say after tax cost. After tax cost. Cost of equity is 17.21. After tax cost of bank OD 8.4%. After tax cost of bonds 6.06. Then cost of preference shares, there is no tax benefit there. Cost of preference shares 6.42%. So these are the cost of capitals. Now, examiner also gives us values of each capital. Values of capitals. Values of each capital in dollars million. So we are told the company has issued 40 million shares The company has issued 40 million shares. The current market price is given as 2.3. There is no mentioning of the nominal value per share. So we can assume it to be $10. But the market value is given as 2.3. So in this case, we can even use market values, because even for the other capitals, we have market values given by the examiner. So we'll use market values for all capitals. Let's say I'll correct first adjust this market values of capital. So with regard to equity, there are 40 million shares. 40 million shares at 2.3 per share. So value of bank overdraft is 3 million. The company has issued $1,000 par value bonds. The total par value is 8 million, but the market value is 915. So this is what we are going to do for the bonds. Bonds par value is 8 million. Par value is based on par value per bond, that is 1,000, but the market value of each bond is 915. 915. So total market value of the bonds is 7.32. Then preference shares. The company has issued 5 million preference shares. Current market price is 9.35. So these are the market values of different capitals. So I can now take the total market value also, 149.07%. So now based on these market values and the cost of capitals, I can calculate the weighted average cost of capital. That would be each cost into each market value. So that divided by the total value of all capitals. So 13.09%. You can say 13.1% or 13.10%, roughly. 13.1 is the weighted average cost of capital that you can check with the question given. So you can see weighted average cost of capital answer for question number 2 is 13.09%. Our answer is also same, 13.09 or 13.10%. So answer is accurate. So with this, I conclude today's session. So in today's video discussion, we have discussed cost of capitals. And after discussing the presentation on the cost of capitals, we have moved into discussing some questions on risk and return. After which we came back to cost of capitals to discuss some questions given in the tutorial by the ECU. So with this, I'm going to wind up today's video lesson. So in week 9, we are going to start investment appraisals or capital budgeting through another video lesson. Thank you very much.